There was a time when you heard the word Republican that the first thing that came to mind wasn't child molester. Jay Leno recently told his audience what the GOP stood for. Grand old pedophiles. Well, you don't laugh at the joke unless there's truth in the message.
There's the Mark Foley scandal, of course, a Republican congressman hitting on teenage members of the Page program, a real gem, this clown. His disgusting behavior apparently well known in Washington, and yet the Republican leadership of the House chose to do nothing until Foley's behavior became public.
Congressman Mark Foley had been using the internet to engage in sexual conversations with congressional pages for years. In fact, ABC has obtained 52 separate instant messages allegedly sent by Foley to at least 2 boys under the age of 18. Tyson Vivian in a Factor exclusive interview about his relationship with Congressman Foley. How old were you when these messages came in?
Well, since it was just upon returning to Knoxville, I would have been 17 years old.
Right. When these suggestive sexual messages came in, were you shocked? How did you respond to it?
Well, at first, not knowing who it was, it didn't overtly shock me. I mean, it's the internet, it's the mid-90s, you know, I'm a teenage guy, I get stuff like that all the time. Now, upon figuring out several weeks later that it was Congressman Foley, I was kind of taken aback by the whole situation. But it didn't overtly surprise me to say, because there had been rumors about Congressman Foley, of which the majority of my class were aware of during my tenure in D.C.
And the rumors were?
Well, there was a moniker by which we described Foley. It was FFF, and it came to turn out that stand for Foley the Fag from Florida. And it was kind of a running joke, teenagers being teenagers, you know, high school kids not having exactly the best sense of civility. We ran with it, and I guess in this case, to a certain extent, maybe not the fag part, but at least a troubled part turned out to be true about the congressman.
When you found out it was Foley, did you cut off the chat?
Absolutely not. I never pursued or welcomed anything sexual in nature from the congressman. My important thing was trying to maintain and build platonic, strong contacts in Washington, D.C. for my future, just like any good politically savvy individual would. Unfortunately, the congressman apparently didn't have the same ideas in mind.
This Evilarchy, such as RIIA, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, is almost the grandson of what we see as Freemasonry and the Illuminati skull and bones within America. And to my opinion, what they are after is your soul, is your spirit. They have harnessed your body, they are trying to take over your mind, and they're going for something much deeper. They are trying to damage your soul. And I believe that because this planet is going into a higher frequency, certain people are not going to be able to make it. And so by damaging you, by making you one of them, because they are very unhappy and pathetic people, they are trying to make sure that you won't ascend, and you'll have to hang out in a hell realm with these degraded evildoers. I call them evildoers.
You mentioned about AC/DC, and Karl Rove, I have heard, is named Miss Piggy in the gay bars around. Do you want to tell us a little bit about George Bush's gay life?
Well, you know, coming from a member of the gay community, it is absolutely hypocritical, it is self-hating to see someone that we know, and that there's actually been testimony by a woman by the name of Leola McConnell, that she brought together a gentleman by the name of Victor Ashe and George Bush for sexual entourages and flings, and she has come out and stated that publicly. And The reason why she did was because George Bush went back out there, tried to fan the flames of his sheeple to sit there and say no to gay marriage and to once again denigrate love. He doesn't like love in any form. And he himself is, of course, against the tenets of Christians. But for some reason, they are still buying the lie, which is George Bush.
Now comes an explosive new book by a former senior aide to President Bush named David Quo. He talks about how members of the Bush administration laughed at the evangelical Christians behind their backs, mocked them, all the while taking their money and their support. People in Karl Rove's office, according to the book, reportedly used to refer to the evangelicals as the nuts.
The Christian community thinks of him as straight, and his chief of staff is wandering around the gay bars, I hear, in around Washington, D.C. and Georgetown. Am I right or am I wrong?
Oh, and guess who they're walking with? What about the name of Jeff Gannon? What about the gentleman that got special access to George Bush, helped leak Valerie Plum's name out in the press, but he had a website, 2 of them, that showed him as a high-placed and high-paid male prostitute, and he spent a number of days inside the White House. And so we don't know how they were running around that Oval Office, but it doesn't look good.
Well, you talked about running around the Oval Office and inside the White House. How about inside George Bush? Maybe you could give us a better perspective.
Well, very interesting. There is a little perspective out on George Bush and how well he took to it. He wasn't a stranger. The Leola McConnell reports she arranged for George Bush and Victor Ashe to come together, and she said that he is quite effeminate in his demeanor, but he was a cheerleader at Yale. And so, but he certainly was very skilled at what he did with another man.
When you say skilled at what he did, what are we talking about here?
He's been there before.
Okay, now about Karl Rove. The conservatives are supporting Karl Rove. They say, he's directionalizing the activities of the White House. I mean, what are we talking about here?
He is lucky to have that little doughboy with him. Because look, you know what? I'm surprised Karl Rove that if he went up and touched his suit, that it was made of rubber. Because he is one big proctologist that's able to control Bush's mouth whenever he makes speeches. It is amazing that there is a remote control from Karl Rove to Bush's brain and then to his teeth and jowls that help him to keep the lie going. But I know people are getting sick of it. They're seeing holes in it. And I can't wait for the body politic to get up and do something about it.
In the gay community, is it discussed at all that Karl Rove is named Miss Piggy, or can you give us any perspective in that at all?
Maybe if I had, if I was a member of the Log Cabin Republican Club, I might hear a little bit more about that. But mostly people see the hypocrisy right in front of their eyes. And you know what? I don't think the gay community wants them as a part. They're self-haters. They are spreading hate and degradation. And I think that would be fine for them to resign from the gay lifestyle. And we wouldn't miss them at all.
But Miss Piggy is, and have you heard of him called Miss Piggy?
Actually, that's a new one for me, Anthony, but it fits. It fits. When you look at him, for some reason, I'm getting really bad flashes. And I really do not want to see him in a little bonnet and a little snout on, running around and somebody greasing him up with Crisco. That's what comes to me when you talk about Karl Rove as Miss Piggy. How dare he? And I wonder if he wears the wig, too, Miss Piggy's wig.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I
can see, yeah, definitely.
I wonder how this would go in the Christian churches down in Alabama.
I'm telling you, if they knew, and I think Bush Sr. said this at one point, if they knew what it took and what they did to run the country, to in a sense fashion us as a bunch of sheeple lab animals, we would turn around and revolt without a single thought. It is in the Constitution that we are to protect this amazing experiment in human progress against enemies foreign and domestic.
Are we talking about an injection of the mark of the beast, the digital angel and the Verichip? They want the digital angel and all of the animals, and we have obviously an invasion of this country from Mexico, and it's been allowed. and authorized, legitimatized the amnesty program by Ronald Wilson Reagan. 666. So this invasion with maybe 21 million illegals in this country, has this been set up so that they could then come in and say, well, we've got to control the problem? They make it a problem. They say, well, we're going to give them amnesty, but maybe citizenship for a biochip.
This invasion is deliberate and by design. When you see Bush from the Skull and Bones, and Kennedy, and all of these people talking about amnesty and recognition of the 20 million illegals, what they're talking about is the end of all borders and the unification of the Americas, not for the purpose of giving freedom to these people, but rather giving a world government, giving them change. We're talking about the elimination of maybe 90% of the Mexican population.
Are we talking about a citizenship 666? Has this invasion been orchestrated? And if so, is it to give them the opportunity to introduce the Jew chip? Remember the Jew tattoo? So they could identify all of the Jews and number them and herd them off and eliminate them? Are we not talking about, I know the Jew tattoo, but now is this not a Jew chip, but it's not the Jews, they're going after the Latinos, who will do, if they're desperate, anything to get the citizenship. They will take the citizenship.
You bring up an amazing relationship between immigration and the RFID chip and just the pressures that are happening within the United States, especially California, Arizona, and Texas. And as you know, where was the RFID very effectively employed? But in Mexico, within the Department of Interior, where he had every single one of his workers, if they wanted a job, they had to take the chip. And did any of them stand up and protest against it? No, they took the chip. We have a population that's desperate, that wants a piece of the American pie. And what is the price going to be? It could be a price that's going to be paid by every single American. Because, well, they took it. They must be more patriotic than you. They must be more for the security of America than you. Who are the new Americans? Is it going to be the people that
are we talking now about a citizen chip, a 666 mark of the beast, offered by the man who professes to be a Christian? Will he introduce this idea to install in our Latino brothers and sisters the mark of the beast, literally selling their soul to Satan?
You know what you hear in the Christian community, that we will give up some of our liberties for safety, for security. And so the mark of the beast can come in a lot of different forms for that security. And it could be the RFID that is not only going to tag and try and track and just, it's not even going to track people. It is just a way for them to be able to intimidate, to create fear and divide and conquer. And it could start in the immigrant populations, and then it is going to spread because people have it in their minds that giving up liberties brings them security. And it is the opposite.
The statement was made many years ago. Those who will willingly give up their liberty for security deserve neither liberty nor security.
This message, Anthony, has been coming to us before the Eisenhower period. It has been coming to us from George Washington, from Abraham Lincoln, from Jefferson, who has told us about the power of the crown and that the Civil War has not stopped.
What is the difference between George Washington, who never told a lie, and George Bush, who rarely tells the truth?
And look who really has the wooden teeth. George Washington did not have wooden teeth, but we see the wooden head of George Bush. The American public has decided to delegate its power and authority to a little demigod. We have delegated and shanked our responsibility in this great republic, federal republic, not democracy, federal republic, to hold our leaders accountable. And
now,
so,
a democracy is majority rule.
yes.
So if there were 5 people in the room, there was 2 blacks and 3 whites, the 3 whites could vote to kill the 2 blacks. A constitutional republic allows for the individual to remain independent and free from the majority. So I am for, as you know, a free world alliance where we recognize the tribal, linguistic, racial, religious, and political nation states and allow the right to integrate, segregate, discriminate, the right to be wrong. If there was, let's say there's a gay bar out there and they just wanted all black women, should they not have the right to do that? Or if they wanted, if, like something for me, maybe all black women and white men. I mean, maybe, I'd like maybe something like that, I could entertain that thought. Do we have the right to be wrong? Do we have the right to be free? Shouldn't we not have the right to discriminate in things that are of a personal nature and not public?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Anthony. Public and private discrimination. I think that, of course, individual freedoms have to be at the top of what we are trying to attain, but discrimination is a step backwards. If we really understand as spiritual beings who we are, that we have manifested in flesh, and that this flesh is what perishes, but the spirit goes on, we have to, as spirits, come together as whole, understanding that we weren't made equally. There are folks, that are smarter than others. There are natural hierarchies, but the capacity and the compassion of the spirit is boundless.
Well, you know that I like chocolate chicks. I mean, let's start again. People say, well, I discriminate, but I don't really, I prefer. It's a preference.
Yes.
Should I not have the right to have that preference, or should it be governed by the government?
Well, you know what you're talking about? You're talking about love. You're talking about affinity. You're talking about liking broccoli over peas. That, of course, is something that is that's only going to enhance your existence and enhance an understanding amongst people, to be able to love the unlike you. That is something that broadens. And so it isn't discrimination what you're doing. Like you said, it is preference, and it is a growing evolution of the body politic, and it has to be supported.
Every political pimp and prostitute along the Potomac knows that Washington, D.C. is AC. Or is it AC-DC? Often there are administrative aides, secretaries, even pages who are willing to bend over under the beltway of the nation's capital. And often by going down, they find it's the fastest way up. There are many congressmen over the years that have been known to turn a page or two. And I'm not talking about reading a book. Ever since Mark Foley blew into town, our congressmen, our senators, pages, and most certainly the President of the United States have known full well that Mark had been sucking more than just oranges down there in Florida. Foley's fraternity of fancies have been butt buddies with George W. Bush. Karl Rove, that fella Jeff Gannon, who seems to have a lot of presidential privileges. And then there's Dave Dreyer and that crowd. Then, of course, there's David Hastert, Speaker of the House. You don't think that he and his partner could possibly have known what was going on and who was doing what to whom. Yet he claims innocence. He doesn't know what's going on. His aide, Scott, may or may not have said something at some time. Oh, but Hastert, he's totally innocent of it all. It's hard to believe for most people in the Christian conservative community that they've been had, and that the White House is run like a whorehouse, and that there are consistent favors going back and forth in exchange for positions of power and wealth. I know that some of you may be beginning to ask the question now, does Miss Piggy do more for George Bush than just his thinking? Would it surprise you to find out that Mark Foley, Karl Rove, and Jeff Gannon and all of those other guys have been walking down Lollipop Lane for years, just looking for another stick of candy to lick? Oh, you just couldn't believe it. You just couldn't think that the neocon conservatives in the White House and in the Congress could be doing such things. But then it's like H.L. Mencken once said, one can never underestimate the intelligence of the American public. If I discovered that Dennis Hastert, George Bush, and Clay Aiken were doing a threesome on the floor of the Oval Room of the White House, it doesn't matter. Nor does it really matter if the GOP has gone gay, but they're telling us something else. They're telling us one thing and they're doing another. They're sending our troops into battle who are dying for no cause. The president is leading us into war, saying that he is trying to find peace. And thousands, hundreds of thousands are dying. Their goal is not world peace, but world government. I'm a libertarian. Frankly, I wouldn't care if Hillary Clinton, Janet Reno, and Ellen DeGeneres were getting it on in some lesbian bar in the Village. That's not the point. It's hypocrisy when they tell us one thing and they do another, when they lead us down the garden path, not into the promised land, but into the desert to die. That concerns me and should concern all of you. About the GOP, it doesn't matter whether the GOP is G-A-Y. If they were just honest, but they're not. Yes, there's some grand old pedophiles, child molesters, operating within the confines of the Beltway in the nation's capital. They're handling not only your business, but your children. What I object to is that the GOP is lying to their constituents. Bush and the neo-Nazi cabal that runs this country are not Christians, and they're not conservative. They've got another agenda. When Bush laid nude in the coffin at the Skull and Bones and was born again into the Satanic Order in 1968, another fellow named Victor Ashe, who became mayor of Knoxville, was laying in the same coffin just a year before, in 1967. Both were born again into the brotherhood of death. I'm a Christian. It bothers me to see Bush, Cheney, Kissinger, Rockefeller, Rumsfeld, Rove, Wolfowitz, and that whole neo-Nazi cabal use the Christian conservative community like toilet paper. The neo-Nazis wipe their butts with our religion, our morals, our nation, and our Constitution. In this particular case, I believe that most of those in this country who consider themselves right are wrong. Oh, they have a goal. One world. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. As it was with Adolf Hitler, so it is with George Walker Bush. And if you liked what Hitler did, you're going to love what George Bush is about to do. Should they be stopped? No, I think that's pretty self-evident. They must be stopped. In this particular case, the so-called right, meaning the neo-Nazis, are dead wrong. And in this particular case, in this country, the left is right. They can see, but the Christian community is walking around with blinders on. They're listening to the likes of Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, Reverend John Hagee. Ralph Reed and Sean Hannity are preaching the Judas Goat gospel.